Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 792A, and today's date is October 15th, 2015, and the title of this episode is The Economic News Continually Shows the Economy is Collapsing. Let's get right into the economic collapse financial news. As time goes on, we are hearing more and more bad news about the economy. Now, of course, the corporate media, they're burying a lot of the stories. They don't want to discuss it. Of course, we're in that time period where there is no bad weather. There's no snow. It's not cold. And they really can't explain why all this bad news is coming out. So a lot of the corporate media, news organizations like to set up polls. They like to fudge a lot of the numbers. And they try to make it look like everything is doing much, much better than it really is. And of course, they want us all looking at the stock market because the United States government, central bankers, the high-frequency traders, the plunge protection team, they have the ability to keep that propped up. They have the ability to suppress precious metals. They have the ability to control the economy because really they're in control of the economy. The people are sitting on the sidelines right now. This is a central bank economy. And they're creating bubbles, propping up all the different markets, trying to figure out all different ways where they can manipulate the system to keep it going for a little bit longer until they can get everything into place where they can just let it fall to pieces and they can blame this on another group, another country. And we see out of Bloomberg, they're continually telling us from their consumer information, and Bloomberg has a consumer comfort index, and they're saying that the consumer comfort index is on the rise, which I find very interesting because we're seeing more and more layoffs. We're getting more and more news about the economy, which is falling apart, but they're trying to convince us that consumers feel a little bit more comfortable, especially when retail sales are declining. And this reminds me of the government paid consumer confidence model, which is continually rising compared to the Gallup consumer confidence model, which is falling because one is taken from the actual people and the other one is a paid organization from the government. But Bloomberg is saying their consumer comfort index is rising at the fastest pace since 2009. Comfort rose from 41.6 to 43 as men dropped from 48.2 to 47.6. So women rose up from 41.6 to 43 and men dropped. In the black community, we see that they jumped from 40.3 to 45.9 in their comfort level. And when I look at this, something really doesn't make sense because if we take the next step and we look at the initial jobless claims and we know that many people are being laid off at this time, we know there's a lot of layoffs, a lot of corporations are laying off people. We see that the initial jobless claims, they plunged to 42-year lows. Now, again, something doesn't make sense. I mean, this week, the initial jobless claims collapsed by 7,000 to 255,000. This is the lowest since 1973. And when we look at the layoffs from Challenger, Gray, and Christmas, we see they are rising and the initial jobless claims are falling. Now, of course, Goldman Sachs is out there trying to explain it away of why this is happening because a lot of people don't like to apply for it and they have all these different reasons and calculations to confuse us. And what's really happening here is very simple. Just like the unemployment numbers, the government is sitting there manipulating the numbers. That's it. It's one big manipulation game. And we know that this is complete manipulation, and we know the corporate media tries to figure out all different ways to cover up what's really happening. And the retail sales, they've come out, and we discussed this yesterday, and they're absolutely awful. And a lot of the corporate media is out there, they kind of bury this information on their websites or in newspapers because they can't blame this on snow, cold, flooding, drought, swarms of locusts, or anything else. So they try to hide this information that the economy isn't doing as well as it is. And of course, they place a different story on the front page or on the front page of the website to convince you that everything is fine, or look over here and they try to distract you. But when we looked at the retail sales, we see everything is in decline. Actually, it's a complete mess. And when we look at all the statistical information like GDP, inflation, and whatnot, we see that certain things are being propped up in all different ways. I'll give you an example. Consumer spending accounts for about 68% of the GDP. So we know consumers aren't really spending that much right now. They're not spending on gasoline. They're not spending on retail. They're not really out there spending. They're only buying the things they absolutely need. So in 2008, consumer spending accounted for 68% of GDP. Here we are 7 years later, and it still represents 68% of GDP. The difference is the spending has shifted dramatically towards services since we had the financial crisis. Now, spending on services has grown by 31% versus 20% for goods since 2008. Guess what has caused that surge? It's been Obamacare. Spending on healthcare has skyrocketed. They knew they needed something to keep the GDP numbers up. They knew that people wouldn't be spending. They know retail is failing. It's contracting. People don't have jobs. They don't have the funds. So they need to substitute the spending. So they brought in Obamacare. What else has increased? Well, rent, taxes, utilities, educational expenses. All of it has increased. At the same time, real median household incomes are 7% lower than they were in 2008. So what do we have here when we're looking at this whole thing? In 2008, 68% was consumer spending. That made up the GDP. 7 years later, they're telling us it's the same exact thing. But all they did was they took out a huge portion of the retail spending and moved it into Obamacare. And everything else went up. Taxes, mortgages, rents, and everything else. And they're saying, oh yes, GDP is still fantastic. But people aren't spending on goods. And that's pretty evident when we look at manufacturing and the Baltic Dry Index. Now, we understand in the housing market, they're continually pushing up the housing prices. And people are like, well, are they trying to get people to purchase homes? Yes, that's one of the reasons. That's one of their agendas. They're trying to make it look like the economy's doing well. And they're hoping that people would just come out and purchase homes. But they knew it wasn't going to work, and they knew it wasn't going to happen. And they knew this because back in 2013, they started to have mass layoffs in the mortgage departments. Because they knew they weren't going to need these people. Bank of America and Wells Fargo, Citibank, JP Morgan Chase laid off tens of thousands of people, and it continued on until present. And you can go back on Google and check this out. You can see all the layoffs. But the question is, why in the world did they care so much about housing? Why did they have to prop it up? Well, the reason for this is we have to look at the big picture here. The majority of household assets are owned by the top 10%. And this includes the majority of financial assets. The top 0.1% own 22% of all U.S. household wealth. The top 1% own 35%, and the top 10% own 75%. Households below the 10% may have financial assets such as insurance policies, 401ks, pensions. But a house is typically the largest store of value the household owns. If you want to make the top 1% and top 10% happy, you prop up the stocks and bonds. which we see. But then we have the rest of the population. Now, if the housing prices went down and they went to all-time lows, it would be a complete disaster. So how do they make the other 60% happy? Keep them in this illusion that they still have a store of wealth. Well, they propped up the housing market. They pushed the prices up by having the banks not foreclose on houses. They kept them off the market. The Fed gave hedge funds, investment companies, free money. They paid in cash. Foreign investors came in and paid in cash, while the U.S. population sat on the sidelines. So those people who have their houses, they feel better about what is happening, even though it's only on paper. They just have that feeling that everything is okay. So if the housing market tanked, it would collapse the middle class wealth, the 60%. And they couldn't have this happen. They needed it propped up to create the illusion, and this is why they did it. Now, what we're seeing is everything else is still falling apart. And we know that all of this is basically bubbles. Housing bubble, the automobile bubble, student loan bubble, stock market bubble, treasury bubble, derivative bubble. You name it, it's a bubble, and it's controlled by the central bank. But when we look at what's really going on in the economy, we see that things are not going well whatsoever. The Philly Fed, their general business activity, showed that it's not really doing that well. There was a slight bump up from -6 to -4.5, but it missed expectations. But we're seeing that new orders collapsed from +9.4 down to -10.6. Unfilled orders crashed to a -11.7. Employment plunged from 10.2 to -1.7. This does not look good. Empire Fed, a complete disaster. We look at this and we see new orders are down. We see this whole entire thing falling apart. The Empire Fed collapses to 5-year lows. So what we're seeing here is manufacturing is dead in the water. We see retail is dead in the water. Housing is falling apart right now. Prices are coming down. Mortgage applications plunged by 27%. This whole entire thing is started to crumble apart. The Baltic Dry Index, which is the raw material used for manufacturing, it dropped another 21 points. It's down to 766. During the busiest season. I mean, think about this for a second. Where we are headed. We are headed for a major collapse, and it's approaching. And the corporate media, the U.S. government, they can't explain any of this. How do you explain this? There's no way to explain it. All they tell you to do is look at our manipulated, illusionary statistical numbers, and you'll be fine. Just believe us. But when we look at everything else, it's collapsing right in front of our eyes. And it's going to accelerate as we've been seeing. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.